It's time for another episode of the PowerPaps podcast. Welcome, everyone. My name is Fredrik Satra, and I'm the PowerPaps. So today I also got Alicia back to talk more in depth about her CopilotStudio agent and the demo that she built using a vendor onboarding process. I've used it already 3 times this week, and it is really good because it gives us a way of looking at agents and in the context broader than just the agent builder and how we can use all the different technologies. In this episode, we'll deep dive into each of the individual actions. We'll show a bit about how you can asynchronously look at the different processes and how you can trigger an agent and kind of infuse prompts into that agent while it's running and the thought process is running. And we'll also try and recompose or re-architect or rethink the way that we think about CopilotStudio as a whole, because I think it might be an ability to look at it as a multi-agent orchestrator. And we'll get into this in this podcast, so don't go anywhere. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. And again, just a small disclaimer. Again, this time me and Alicia went online and we had a podcast, of course, live, so you should watch it there. But in the beginning, I had performance issue. Last time we had audio issues. I don't know what's happening here, but this time I had some tiny little performance issue in the beginning. So we'll see the video kind of being a bit janky, but that gets fixed really fast as I'm starting frantically to close different windows on my computer to up that performance. And it worked really well throughout the podcast. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. And again, another disclaimer, of course, me and Alicia, we work for Microsoft, but this is the kind of the official stance of Microsoft. It's just us kind of sharing our experiences by using this technology, and enjoy. So let's dive into it. Last week, I'll put your screen up here. Last week we talked about this wonderful agent that you built, and we went through the process and how it looked like. But now I want also to have a look at underneath the hood, right? Because we looked at the prompt and it seemed very interesting, and it wasn't, according to what it could do, it was really magical to see that the very short prompt. But I guess there's more underneath the hood that we need to look at to fully understand where all of the magic happens. So today we're going to go through the knowledge, and then we'll look at some of the flows that you're using, because also that is really important to understand the context of this. So let's jump in.
Awesome. Okay. And it's a lot to cover, right? Yeah. And last week made me realize that there's a lot of things I don't know either. And I need to put myself into more education and trying to understand the best practices and so. So this agent is not perfect. It has flaws. And as you can imagine, we learn upon it. But it's really good to understand and back to basics. And there's going to be this very strong, bold statement from me: less is more. Always. Whenever we work with AI, less is more. Because we tend to write a lot of very creative messaging and a lot of information in instructions because we want to put this all together. But in the end, we can actually confuse AI in many cases. So being bold, being to the point, and leave instructions and description for the most important components, almost like a checks milestones to your process. But everything else should be focused more on the topics and actions themselves, because both have a lot to give from the context perspective, and they are very important to understand the relationships between those actions, how they're going to work independently, but also together, how we're passing input and taking the outputs to have that very seamless process going to the end and successfully. So what I'm going to do today with Fred is having a conversation. So please do ask questions if you have any, but we're going to just break it to the smaller pieces. And we'll jump into the actions and some other pieces. But I think it's important to focus on what really that description and instruction mean to us. So from the first, what I learned recently, what's probably pretty helpful is formatting. So the rich text, it does make a difference here in the instructions. What you see here is I have some points and I have some dashes and like a sub comments. these instructions, these steps make a difference on the sequence of events that you want the agent to follow. Because bear in mind that we're talking about the autonomous agent, so it's by default switched to Gen AI orchestration. And that means we give a freedom for the agent to make a decision and reasoning based on the knowledge base, but also based on description and instructions to make that decision what to do in order to complete the task. And we talked about it last time when when we define the description, we give it a specialism. We give it a context and years of what I said before, the years of experience. So keep your instructions small. And I would even, from my experience, start building the app gradually. So start from first steps and actions you want to do, but also don't put already like end-to-end desired state if you don't have actions that or topics that can cover those steps. Agent will not be able to act upon them if you, let's say, send an email to the vendor and you don't have the action to do it, right? So don't confuse the agent and try to build it up gradually as your confidence grows, and change that upon your knowledge and how you evolve your agent. So I think we covered the knowledge. I'm not going to go deeper into the knowledge because we did say we looked under the hood of Dataverse. We know that now we can convert difficult, like complex naming conventions to something more natural language focused. So we can indicate to the agent when we want to use that knowledge, how to interpret certain synonyms and glossary and its description.
So that was
right?
the glossary that when we opened
Yes.
up. So that was kind of the final piece that we covered last week.
Exactly.
Yep.
And we can add so much different knowledge here. The websites, you can cut your agent out of the general knowledge, so it's not going to reach out to Bing search, right?
No.
And only focus on your data that is your business data you wanted to use. So you have lots of options here, and that list only just grow. Also, just bear in mind that we integrate natively with lots of vendors, a lot of different providers, and that can serve as the knowledge base as well. Right, so good to know. One of the very strongly used and leveraged for large data is Azure AI Search. I don't have it in this agent, but when you leverage the power of Azure, so we integrate things together, better together as always. We really get some solid results based on RAG, and responses are very accurate, and everyone is using RAG and semantic kernel. So here you go.
All of this is basically RAG, right? Because what we're doing here is also doing like a subset of these things. And I think it's important to understand that everything that you put into these, even if you vectorize it through Azure AI Search, it's going to be an excerpt of that information that's going to be pulled back to the agent. It's not going to be the entire thing. So I think also to understand the RAG component here is not. I mean, context windows are constantly increasing, and I really love like the latest one from Llama 4 now has almost like an unlimited context window, but it also increases the cost of execution, right? Which is also an element of the new reasoning engine that's behind this. And have you tried turning that on and see how it actually performs then? Have you tried it afterwards? Maybe that will be a fun exercise for the next round.
Yeah,
right?
we can do it. Let's continue. If this is an attractive subject, we can absolutely continue. I learn a lot, you learn a lot, and if everyone else can learn, then amazing. And one more thing, I think it's important to notice here, right? You mentioned something about the cost, and cost is always temporary. And we, just like with the shift of everything we have, the phones are commodity these days. The minutes, we don't count how we call our friends and family to speak to them and have a dollar or pound per minute. That changes over time. So we did before.
I mean,
exactly.
I grew up, my parents don't call too long. Like, you have to be short in your messages when you call.
There was a meter ticking.
There
right?
was a meter ticking. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same happens here. AI, it's already getting cheaper every time we look at it, and
Yeah.
I think this is going to be simply a commodity in a very near future. So leveraging functionality of AI, it's always a good power. That's why we're doing it with the Gen AI as the orchestration. We're leveraging actions with GPT prompts that are part of this framework,
Mm.
and that's what gives us really intuitive, natural language driven agents. But again, I'm going to focus on the autonomous agent,
Yeah.
right? Because they are slightly different. They by default they are set to have a Gen AI as the orchestration. You can't switch it off. Right. So it's important. You can't switch off if you define that you want to use the triggers. So this thing here at the front, right? So if you build up your agent to be triggered based,
Mm.
you no longer be able to switch it back to the classic. Oh, you do? Okay.
That's new.
Uh, I don't think you could in the past. So it was always set to generative AI because it needs to make some decisions over the actions, right? But we can confirm that because everything is like changing as we see it in SaaS.
Yeah.
So we can absolutely confirm that classic version.
Well, if
My
you do it, I
assumption,
guess it would just kind of discontinue the or cancel the act or the trigger. Then it would just kind of disable it, because the classic one is where you would have like a text interface and you have to kind of go this back and forth, while the
yes,
generative one is basically like an orchestration engine that decides kind of the outcome, and it can get stuck as well,
exactly.
right? And I heard one of my
Yeah.
colleagues. I was at a hackathon yesterday, and he said, always give the Copilot an out, right? So if this is,
Yes.
always remember to kind of have an exit point, which is also a best practice, and you do that through the prompt saying, like, if nothing happens, then just don't make up stuff, just leave it.
Exactly. And every single part of this framework gives you that option to what happens if something is not right. If I was to go maybe look at one action as
Mhm.
an example, right? Actions are those individual components that they will perform something, come back, return. So always input and output is given,
Mhm.
right? But it's expected. So input is expected, and in autonomous agent, um, the definition of what to put inside those values as an input is um, about the reasoning from the agent. Most of the time, you can set them up to be very specific values, but let's just give you an example. But most of the time, I wanted to reason on its own because I wanted to leverage what is the context of the conversation. And in those inputs, you may find that, for example, the vendor name is not clear.
Mhm.
Right. An agent may confuse itself, saying, I have no idea what it is. And obviously you can add as much of description here as you want. But you also have options here to say at what point I'm going to retry something. And with the autonomous agent, it's difficult because you, with the repeat the same prompt, that means I'm going to ask something interactively. And that's out of our scope when it comes to the interaction. We don't have that, right?
Yeah.
When the process ran. So we want to understand at what point we don't want to, we want to get maybe some replacement value to be default. And if I was to look at this, it would be a vendor name. So let's brainstorm, right? Could I do better with this input?
Okay.
Yeah, I could just say if the vendor name is not identified, go and don't repeat that.
Mhm.
But also, if I get this right here, do not valid entity found, right? So this option here, and you have those options of like a getaway, right? You can escalate, so you can, for example, put it into the topic for escalation and build out your escalation to maybe send a message to the teams, to the operators, and then act upon it and put some of the error trappings from that end. But you also can say leave the variable empty
Yeah.
or set the variable as a value. And here I can say no name. What does that mean? What if I do this as a no name? Well, I can now set some check in within the agent or within the flow of within the create vendor onboarding record flow to say, if this value is set to no name, return the output with certain information of we couldn't start this process because the vendor name was not provided. But that means that agent will not fail. The flow will capture that comment and return back quite good information to what to do next. So, as an example, my flow could identify no name as I can't process it further, and send the prompt back, information back, instruction back to the agent as the output, saying we cannot process this further. Send an email to the vendor asking for the full vendor name or more details.
And would you put that in the kind of the instruction set as the way to instruct that? Because I mean,
you can put that as the output.
And this is something that you normally achieve when you when you're looking at this, right? When you're running through these things, this is something where when you test it, you get into, like, say, a stop scenario where it basically just says, I don't know the name and I can't do anything, so it kind of doesn't know this, and then you go in and kind of tweak these parameters to kind of help it push along on its journey, so that it doesn't stop there next time, and then you put a way out, or almost like an error handling function or a prompt inside of the instruction set.
That's correct. And so what you see here is the output that I define as a flow. So just to give you a better understanding, in your action, this action is based on a flow. If I click on that, it opens in a second tab, and it will show me a standard Power Automate flow, which is super powerful, right? And we know we tested it, we ran it in massive projects, and you can do exactly the same, leverage the same capabilities by triggering it from the agent. But those inputs and outputs are simply what the flow is doing. Take the input as the values. So in here, it's expected that I have defined 3 different values, which reflect back in my agent as the input.
Because this is the input that's kind of delivered into that. When you look at the action inside of the agent,
just here,
those
vendor
are the ones
name.
that pulled out. Yeah.
Then you have the vendor ID, right? Yeah. And I believe the other one, let me just double check, because the conversation ID.
And can you click the 3 dots? Because it says, so two of them were mandatory, and then one of them was not. And I think you see that.
That's correct.
Yeah.
It was somewhere here. Where was it?
I think the vendor ID is probably the one that's set to.
You're right. I think it is. Yeah, make this. Yes. So the checkbox means that I can make it required, but it's set for mandatory. For the optional. Because the reason for that is I may be playing, like, it's always better to work with the unique IDs of the vendor, or any unique IDs. But sometimes you don't get that value, right? Especially with the new customer. You go in, you have an email, and nothing yet been created in your record. So how do you identify that? You have to create a temporary record. And this action actually creates a temporary record and generates that vendor ID. But sometimes you may be in a position where this is a back and forth conversation. So you requested something, and then it's coming back after some time from the vendor, like sending an email. Hey, here's the missing instructions, as we showed in the last podcast. We just see that there could be already embedded vendor ID in that conversation, and we give it an option to fill that slot with that vendor ID and choose it. And you will find some conditionals here. So as you can see, if the vendor ID exists, go in and do a couple of go and try to search by the vendor ID, because it's the most accurate, unique element I can grab. Right. So I always put this as a preferential. It's a matter of choice. This is my methodology of ensuring that if I have a better option, I always start from that better option.
And this is a part of the more declarative logic that we can build in. And so what we talked about in the beginning, where you set it to like the advanced orchestration, generative orchestration, and then the kind of the standard one. The difference is that you're using the chat interface, and this is kind of where we've progressed, and now the orchestration engine and how we talk about it when it's an autonomous part of it, the dialogue back and forth that kind of provides new text input is the actions, and normally that's a flow. So I see, and even with the trigger, right, that's a flow that kind of just starts that off. So I think almost like what you're doing here is the top one is always, that can be anything, but the bottom one, right, the top one is an output from the agent, and then the bottom one is an input to the agent, and that their text that you return. And I guess you were going to say that, right, you have a response here, which is just a free text. And if you do the same thing that I do, I just send a response like I would in a prompt. Like I ask it, like, I've done this thing now, and this is the outcome. Here's some values that you might want to use when you want to continue. Enjoy it. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're 100% right here. When it comes to the response, I'll give myself some options, right? Because if I was to be in a big business, maybe different line of business, and I'm responsible for this specific action in my specialism, the contract, we talked about this contract between agent and all of the services that it's using. It's about, what do I want to give as the response? If I obviously want to describe that this is a response, it's going to have a text, it may have some instructions for the agent, and agents should consider that, right? So in this case, if I can't find, I have a no name as the value, and it returns that I can't create this record, this onboarding temporary record, then I'm going to put that definition in a natural language in my response. But I also want to make sure if it's successful, I just state that it was a successful move on. And I want to provide a important data, which is the variables that can be used from the context of conversation for my future steps. Right. And in this case, it was important for me to keep the numbering as a unique ID of the vendor going, because I use it almost in every single action, but also verification unique ID, which is the record ID, the row ID in Dataverse.
That's a GUID, right? That's just
exactly.
a GUID. Yeah. Why the vendor ID is something that is kind of defined by us, while every record that comes into Dataverse has an ID field that you can use. Sometimes it's duplicate checks on it, but sometimes it's not. But the unique ID is the actual GUID, and it's always called the same as the entity, right, or the table.
That's right. So and it's very unique to the table and to the environment as well. There are some options to duplicate it in when you migrate with the data flows, but it's exactly this value that it's unique. So if you delete this record and you recreate exactly the same record, this number will be different. And this is where you can call the functions of retrieve the record by row ID in every single query for Power Automate and agent. Okay. So that's really just to giving you, I don't want to spend too much time of the flow, because again, this is a kind of flexibility to your own use, but it's important to see that those outputs from this flow are automatically registered as the outputs within the agent. And as you can see here, definition of those outputs is very important. Everything that you see in the action, so the display name, the action name, display name, I believe, is the one which is used when you see the nice bubble flows, and it will just display that name. The action name is crucial because you can reference that action name in exactly that structure and say, take the values after this action. And agent should understand that. And the description. And here are a few tips for the description. Again, be very, very accurate to what this action does. Advertise it. So this is your advert space. Put one sentence or two, maximum 2 sentences. Don't make it an essay. So and write it in natural language. Make sure that it's not like a passive language. It's more about how you speak. Okay. So what you want it to do, what you don't want it to do as well, and just a description of what this agent what this action can do as part if it's being triggered. Okay, so the inputs, again, definition we already discussed, and the outputs, when you get those outputs, define them, what they're going to do for you in the future.
Yeah.
Right?
So basically refers back to the top and the bottom node of the flow, right? Inputs, the top one, and outputs, the bottom one. And
absolutely.
I would also, just one technique that you also use that I do on the flow, if you can just go into it, right? Defining these variables is, of course, important. So you set them up at the top, just the ones that you extract. So
you have to initialize the variables, right? And apologies, I think my camera just dropped.
Yeah, but I have a picture of you, so I can while you're fixing it.
So the those instructions are so the initialized variables. It's very important, right? Because we declare variables to use them within the loops, within all of the actions of the flow itself. So you can't skip that initialization first.
No. And then you just put those in as the variables that you return then, right? So you just update.
Yes.
Yep. That's one-to-one with the starting node. All right. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
So it looks like my camera is not going to come back, I'm afraid.
Your fancy camera.
Sometimes it happens. Okay, so let's go back to the conversation.
Yep.
Now we see what's the detail of the flow. There are a couple of other options that you can basically say, how do you want to store your outputs. You have flexibility. The all means that you basically it's going to be more what's coming out. I haven't really worked with the specific one, so I can't exactly distinguish yet. This is another step for me to basically get to know more. But by default, they are being set to all. Okay, and that's probably one of the, when you see it as the native. That's not the right camera. When you see it as the leveraging of the flow itself. Okay, so let's go back here, and I'm going to cancel the changes because I set something for no name, and I want to make sure this is all there.
Yep.
What else we can do? Okay, so you also can find the flag if you test something, or maybe you want to try another flow, and it happens pretty often to me. I want to go and test the flow. Because maybe I'm not very happy with the action, because I'm not very happy with the action that I use in the first place. Instead of deleting the old action, I create a duplicate of I can't create a duplicate, but I create a new action with the new options, and then I decide to switch it on and switch the other off, and make sure that we. Just give me 1 second. Let me give it a go again to...
Yeah, let's see if we can get you back on
bring
camera.
the camera back. Yeah.
Is it the problem when you use these fancy cameras, Alicia? You want to have...
It's a software. Yes, software-based. Unfortunately,
use the included one.
Yeah, okay. Let's just give it use included. Use the one out of the box.
Luckily, I temporarily put in like a placeholder image of you.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. This may be the last time you've seen me.
Yeah, then we'll just...
Okay. Let's just close this window and just in a second correct the...
I just use your standard. Is it a special software that you have to have with the camera?
Yes, it is a software that is the overlay. Hence, you can do certain things like blurring and everything else.
Okay.
But as you can see, it's not necessarily... Oh, here you go. So you're going to see me in this light here. Oops. For some reason...
oh, no, that's awful. No, it's fine. I'm kidding. It's not great.
There you go.
Yeah.
Here you go. It's the same camera, but without software. How's that? It's the hardware
perfect.
now.
No problem. Yeah, no.
Okay.
That's fine.
Right. So let's go back to the business.
Yeah.
So what I say is those switches enable, disable are very useful even for your own development, right? You get to test without deleting anything, and I think it's very, very important. Something worth mentioning is if you update the flows and if you update something within like one of those actions, it's worth to do the refresh. Right, because sometimes those flows may not become visible. So you have this button here to
Yeah, I
basically
always refresh the browser, so that's where you want to do
Oh
because
my.
it's kind of okay. So rookie thing there.
Okay.
Okay, good. Okay, so we click the
And
refresh there.
so helpful tip. If you find yourself that you can't find the action that you maybe independently created,
Yeah.
using the flow as an example, this refresh button may help you. Okay. Every day it's a school day.
Yeah, you learn some, and that's why you should never kind of skimp on the basic courses as well. I think that's a good life lesson because when I go back to I know the level 100 stuff, and then somebody just mentions stuff like that. It's like, okay, that saves me
Absolutely.
at least 30
and
seconds.
This is a perfect segue to show you a couple of websites that actually are very, very helpful. Right? And I'm not sure, are we able, let me just copy that into the chat.
Yep.
So, if you haven't know about this website, this is the best practices. And I strongly, if you start, or even if you already do things and you think you're doing it right, there's not a lot of pages, and the tree is still pretty small. So go into the best practices guidance for CopilotStudio. You will find a couple of things for the traditional agents as well. So classic orchestration and having like how to build topics, how to make them reusable and maybe smaller and calling each other. How to, if you're looking specifically on Gen AI orchestration, you can find best practices under this tree here. So strongly advise you because it's not a lot of information, but it's really crucial information. And one thing that I found very interesting, which I'm going to, after our podcast, I'm actually going to test it myself, is this conversational based instructions. So our team, product team, advising us to basically put it in the format of those three sections.
Okay.
Right? So what you want it not to do. So constraints. You don't have to say write it polite, because actually write it polite is by our default. But if you want it to sound like a parrot, like a pirate or a pirate,
yes, yeah,
you can absolutely say that here. Okay.
Because is that within the? You could do that also within the generative AI node, right? But this is for the instruction set specifically.
This is for this section here. This is for this main section.
Yep.
Okay. So let's call it system prompt. Okay.
Yeah.
Because in the end, this system prompt is the one which is going to apply to every single use case, regardless of the vendor or the trigger, the nature of the trigger, right? The next one is the response format. So you could, in your conversation, or so in the way that you want the agent to build the responses using Gen AI, you can say it to format it, to build it as a columns, as a table, to add the rich text, and that should give you a good enough description to make it happen. And the third part is the guidance. So everything that you basically say it as I say it in those points. As I mentioned, don't be shy over using bullet points and numbers to give the sequence and provide maybe that major structure of what the sequence of events could be, but not necessarily build it out to as many characters as this prompt allows you to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you can move some of that, let's say, details over to the action prompt and the response from there. So kind of handled it as a function.
That is so true. That's you hit the nail here. The extracting some like having this top level framework is good, but the detail and the what you want this to do is all about the advertisement from the action part, right? Because that's where you can be very specific contextually to the action itself, not to overwhelm the agent in one step of throwing the prompt into the agent.
Which makes kind of the way that we see this, because we often talk about this as a agent, right? And I've heard IBM talk about like everything is an agent, even a like an API call can be kind of categorized as an agent, which for me, it made me think a bit differently about how these are built, right? Because if you look at it as the thing that you're proposing here is an orchestrator agent. And then if you think, right, if you look into kind of the general semantics about how to build agents, and you look at videos on the general, how you generally build it, and then go back to CopilotStudio and think, okay, so if I look at the general instructions, that is to my orchestration agent. And then each of the actions or the topics, you would look at them as like sub-agents in and of themselves, with an instruction set and a demand and an input and an output that we also then provide to the orchestration agent to do that. So that changed a bit my perspective on it, and it made a lot more sense then, at least in the multi-agent discussion that's kind of coming up now, and how they kind of contextualize that.
Absolutely. We only need to learn how to build one right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's all about that multiplier. And I think it's great, because that gives us a time to focus on one agent and its capabilities on its own. Yeah. So next one, I'm sure somewhere in few episodes down the line will be something with multi-agent, right?
Yeah, but an agent to an agent, and that's what I'm saying. Like it is a multi-agent. Like even just one CopilotStudio
internally
agent is a multi-agent setup that the orchestrator engine has the ability to do. They don't, and to be honest, you're doing that in this flow as well, where you're basically shooting off a process, and I want to go into that flow, and maybe we can have this is a very simple flow, but you have another one that just kind of flips all the my previously thought about how this works, because when we go into that process, that's when we think that, or it's obvious that we're talking about already a multi-agent setup inside of CopilotStudio, because now we're doing an offset process that kind of infuses data while the agent is just in a pause mode. So can we progress to that if you don't have any are you referring
to the
send email.
Help me send email. Excellent. So the send email is actually interesting. Which one is that? Send email to the vendor. Yes, you're so bear in mind that when you leave the Gen AI and the like ability for it to be creative, context of the email and the understanding of what is required from to basically form the body of the email is being left to the agent's decision. Right. And what I give here, and as you can see here, we can have like, I don't know, 1,500 characters, and this agent has made the
instruction set. That is exactly the instruction set that I talked about, which makes it an agent in and of itself, right? This function or just a flow called an action is an agent that you can build, because if you go to how other people talk about agents, which is a bit of a disconnect when we talk to maybe the pro devs who are building this, and just for the context of it, this is seen as an agent in their mind, at least from what I've built, because they want to componentize it and build components that do different things. And so that's when I just changed the way that I talk about it. So action agent, Copilot, chatbot, right? All of these things become extremely fuzzy.
You have the good kind of tone here, because yes, you have that description, right? And you have those instructions. They are pretty flat, and obviously they, as you said, it's a user or another system prompt that you inject in the process. But this action actually is pretty interesting. Before this action happens, agent needs to make a decision what kind of input as an email body it's going to provide. So this flow is very simple. The reason why I don't use natively the Outlook, the 365 connector from agent, was I wanted to add additional wrapping up in the logic to send an email, maybe with a couple of additional details, right? And in this case, I'm very specific what's my input. Again, very similar to what the previous flow was looking was doing, which is the input values. But the email content is that description, which says write it in HTML format. You can say write it in a rich format. Include necessary information based on the purpose of the email. I don't say ask for, I do say ask for more details, but I say make it appropriate to the nature of what you just figure out a few steps before. Right. So I can say, for instance, you may want to ask for additional documents, or you want to confirm that the onboarding was successful. But I don't really write it. I think in the end, I put something like, maybe not here, but in some of my agents that say, make sure that you always sign it as Contoso supporting team or onboarding team. So it gives like this really nice format and summary. So you could add some stable values when you say always sign with this signature. Right. But in general, you want to leverage send email to the vendor, not too strict. Send email to the vendor for more details, send email to the vendor for confirmation. No, just have functionality of sending email, right?
Yeah.
So this is where you see it. And you also notice that in many of my actions, I always put conversation ID. And we talked about it. Did we talk about it last time?
I don't think we did. And that's why I wanted to go in. So that's why that's the biggest aha moment for me, because this was one of the issues that I had, right? And I just when we had the hackathon, I think also one of the misconceptions about how this works, right? When you trigger an agent from one of these actions, that is a self-contained thing. You can't communicate it in any other way than infuse through this Power Automate or through these actions into that, and then pointing to this specific conversation ID, saying, I want you to have additional value. That is basically it, right? Yeah.
That's right. So whenever you think that you would want to continue the conversation, and that's also important in escalations. So think about it. Your agent is running and it's saying, oh, I'm stuck. I don't have anyone to talk to on the prompt, right? And I need to do something. So it goes into this escalation mode, or whichever you do as the mode to get out mode. And if you don't provide the details of that conversation ID, you kind of lose it because it doesn't really give you the way back.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
But when you send it and you send forget, right? This is not the send and wait. It's send forget. You then put an action to, let's say, send an email to somebody, or put this on Teams or somewhere that basically gives the ability to push the request back to this agent. So if you have the conversation ID, this is exactly where you're going to get that power. And I'm going to show it to you on actually different action, because the action, which is the async action, is asking for somebody to come back to you with an email. And I have it actually.
Yeah, okay. That was the one that I wanted to talk about.
That's right. So let me go back, because the action that I do is not part of the actions within the agent. Yeah, so let's just be very clear. When I do something async, I need to define how am I going to capture that? How am I going to capture that in the state that it's not timing out? So I want to fire something, close it, and whenever something arrives, great, I'm going to take it. And at that, what I've done here was in the separate flow called process email response. So let me just open that for us. Process email response is a individual independent flow, which listening as a trigger. So it listening on the changes to the mailbox. And in this case, I have when email arrives, which is very similar to what you would see in a trigger in agent. But this time, I want it to be its own independent bit. And say, when email arrives, and I also state what kind of email. So here you have, I have environment variable so I can export the solution. To this specific mailbox, go and process it for me. So I'm leveraging here AI Hub and the GPT prompt functionality to take input from the subject, body, and who sent it, and trying to extract information. Fred, you tell me if you want to dive into that bit, or shall we just leave it for another time on prompting?
Yeah, let's leave it for another time. Let's just think about how we kind of get this information back and how we can jump out of a discussion with an agent and then kind of have that response come in. Because, just before we continue, so what I think about, so when you think about how an agent works, right? Again, going back to this manual input, right? It's just a text protocol that you're writing in, and normally it's just you answering your questions and then getting that information back, right? So you can see the timeline and process of an agent, even if it's manually interacted with. It's this entire chat log and things coming in, it answering, you answering something else, it going out, finding the answer, putting that back in. So there's a long string there. And you can see the same thing with it triggered autonomously as well. It does that exact thing. But what's cool about this is that when it comes to this point where you talked about, it just stops and it sits there and waits. When it times out, then it comes to a failure mode. But what we're doing here is just sit there waiting. That's fine. And then we're injecting.
We're closing it.
We're actually reprompting it. We're reprompting it. And that's the conversation ID. That was my big kind of missing piece of the puzzle. So yeah, that's why I wanted this. Yeah.
And this is okay. This is like a little fancy magic here we're doing, which is great because now we can share it with everyone else if you're interested. It's all about leveraging the two functionalities. The first one is as you, Fred, mentioned. We basically putting the process, we stopping it as I've done my job. The ball is on the other side, right? So I'm closing. I'm complete on what was required from me. And now, in order to open that conversation, I need to provide that. So first of all, as you can see here, email arrives. And if this email, so there are two actions here. If this email is a response and it includes, let's say, vendor ID in the subject, then I'm checking it here. And if vendor ID exists, take the value, the verification record from my database and execute. And this is the important part, and execute to knock to the door of that agent saying, hey, I want to talk to you. And this is a conversation ID that I want to use to continue the conversation.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So this value here is exactly what I record as a conversation ID in my temporary verification record. And as you can see as well, I basically pass it in natural language, in nice formatted language to what the vendor is coming back with.
And here's the semicolons again. I think we talked about it last time as well. But
it's a preference, I guess.
Yeah.
Preference. When it comes to, and please do correct me if
no, I think it's good. I just to how people kind of think about this. Think semicolon is really good for a data separator. So yeah, it's a good tip.
And
instead of dashes, because that might be confusing. You can use brackets, or you can kind of put them in squiggly brackets or square brackets to kind of group these things together. But semicolon just how would a text engine understand that these are different values, right?
And keep in mind that GPT, which is basically the whole engine underneath the agents and all of the things that we're doing, is really good at the coding. And it's really good at JSON. So what you notice here, I'm scarred for life that some of those things are kind of show the key and the value with the colon and then so I'm playing around.
I would be very, very picky here, but then you shouldn't have the semicolon at the end. But no, I'm joking.
Here you go, just for you, exclusively.
Yes.
That's what it is. And here's the publishing. So what you see here, just Fred, we build it together, right? When it comes to just finish this tree, because this is also very important, there could be an email coming in, which is completely a new random email from somebody. Right, and we need to acknowledge that. So yes, if I was able to recognize the record, perfect, I can continue the conversation. If I don't, all I simply do is passing the same information or similar information to the same agent, but it will trigger a new conversation line. Okay, so you will have a different activity that happens in your history.
Yeah.
Okay, so the magic happens, as I said. Always try to leverage the goodness of system variables. And just to complete on that loop, if we were to look at action as well again, and we look into what is this conversation ID, so we are very clear what this conversation ID is. Here we go. I set it to a very specific value. And for some reason, it doesn't show it here, but actually it does save it. And another trick, I'm going to show you another trick. So I noticed that the other day, and something that probably we just need to talk internally with our team, because I don't see the value being set. But if you go into the open code editor, so for those people who were not aware, you can edit in the code. So if you're very much into the code and this is a better structure for you, you can do it and you can save it and make it work. So what was important to me was checking, is this really set? Right? And it is. It's set to the system conversation ID as the input. And if I just swap again, and I'll show you how to set it up for those who haven't built the action before, all you do is set it to set the value, and you go into the system and you type conversation, and that's the one here. And that's how it should be visible, and it was. So it may be something on my environment itself. So this is the value we want to always pass. And to also just reference this before we finish on this specific subject, my reference ID. So this is the active onboarding verification table within the model-driven app, and my verification ID is set here to be an agent conversation ID that I store within my record. So whenever I retrieve this record, this is where I'm taking this value from.
This comes into something else that I think is great about this example right here, because again, we talk about agents having memory and these things working with it, right? So what you're providing here through Dataverse is a very good overview of distinct decisions and processes and places to put information as a memory that has distinct capabilities for this specific process. And it's a good, when I argue kind of, yes, you can, if you want to have an onboarding status, you probably have a data layer underneath that you're kind of providing it to. But this is the staging data that you need. And you have to have that in addition when you want to have these processes. And that's the good thing about being on the Power Platform. You have a data store that you easily can create a new table, make that your own, set up the values, set the definitions, make sure that you have all of these things, and then kind of work on top of that for the process that you've triggered, almost like a record of the process that identifies it. And then you have the agent conversation ID, which is also tied to the intelligence that's kind of processing this. Because if you were to do this, let's say just on top of an SAP or a Dynamics solution, all of these things would have to live inside of the entire, let's say inside of the prompt that we talked about, the process and the intelligence for this process, right?
That's correct.
So that is something that I really liked about this, and having this and just showing it like an app right here with all of the contents that it also has, let's say, relational things that is connected to this specific process, right? The document is a one-to-many type of relationship, where you have many documents that is related to this process. And it's a good, it's also an excellent place for us as humans to kind of get an understanding of the sequential outputs during a long-running process inside of these agents. So it's excellent idea.
That's very well said. I in the end, and for those who never tried model-driven app, this is a 10-minute job here, right? To set it up. It's probably less for many, but to really make it all work and visible and doing all of that with lots of customization, it is a matter of a few minutes to build.
I'm a canvas first, but you take the tools that you're most familiar with, right? So it was a bit of a going into. I've just recently done it because I had colleagues that normally was much better at this, so I didn't kind of deep dive into it. But it is really easy. There, just if you want to display information from a record like this, grouping it together, it's super simple to set
Canvas
it up.
is fun. Canvas is fun.
It is.
Model driven is to basically display what I needed to display. That this is my, this is not just my personal view how I use Canvas. With every solution, I always have a model driven app for the admin use. That's my kind of signature. Okay, how are we going with how are we standing with the time?
Because we are about to kind of wrap up, and then we can deep dive into something else later. Because let's kind of close the loop on this asynchronous process where we want to send an email and then we expect some type of return, right? So if we looked at the flow that you had just a generic function that was a Power Automate flow that listens to an inbox, and then it has two outcomes that either goes into building, starting a new discussion with the same agent, or then going in and updating and infusing more text into that string that we talked about, which is the process that is ongoing.
That's right. Yep. That's right. This is exactly it. And I strongly advise people to do it. Few things on that note. Mm-hmm. When you're in a testing mode, so if you go into the agent and you go into the overview, and the way that you can trigger testing from your previous triggers is going into this section here and go and select any of the runs that you had in a flow. If you trigger it from here, what I notice, and this is maybe just simply because of the testing, sometimes when you then do the follow-up in email arrives and you want to continue to the same trigger, it doesn't appear in the same activity. And I was scratching my head around this, but what I noticed is the manual trigger, for example, let's give you an example, this. When you see my name, that's where I trigger it as part of the test. But then the response was going as a separate automated call. So, and this small action happened when I updated the Teams adaptive card. So just exactly in here, just very quickly, giving you an idea. So I said to I don't have anything open, but I said to the agent to send the adaptive card and to approve or reject. And then it came back and just approved. And you can see it in a transcript, right? That reply is the reply from the flow of the adaptive card flow. Right? And it goes back and creates the record in the FNO. This is kind of where you go and start interacting with your ERP system, and sends an email to the vendor, but it's not part of the same conversation. So don't get
So that
confused.
would be a new conversation, but that's where the memory is really great, right? Because it's kind of working on the same data and content.
And I have a feeling that it's purely because the owner of the conversation here is me, and the nature of the reply is automated.
Yep.
Yeah, when you have that completely end-to-end automated, you will have that in one section. Okay, so just when you put it into production, or when you test it by sending an email and the trigger is doing all of the bits, so you don't repeat the same things with your you manually triggering, this is then ending up being a one conversation flow. Okay. Oops. All right, Fred, navigate me. What are we doing next?
So we've talked about the sending of the email, which is basically it just kind of creating an email. And I also very often write it in a nice formatted HTML, and then it becomes a lot more beautiful immediately. And then you return it through this pipeline that we show with the inbox listening.
Yeah.
And then it, because of the message, has a message ID in it, or a conversation ID, and then it just pulls that back, and you used an AI function there, and the ChatGPT function to collect those from that data and kind of structure that in as fields. And then I guess we are basically through this process. Here it is infused inside of a end-to-end flow, right?
Yeah. So something that you've seen in the flow where it only showed the two last steps. This is the one that I triggered by sending an email. And as you can see here, the email message has been sent and the return been put as posted.
Yeah.
Also want to just keep in mind here, this text, the comms message is also generated by the agent. So I don't tell it what to do exactly. I'm just saying the nature of communicating with your onboarding team is to acknowledging certain situation and make up this input and send it as part of the communication. And then when they return it back, and I'm pretty sure it's going to show in this transcript here, right? When it's returned back, it then goes and executes. The status changed in the record. So now I'm going to basically go and create the ERP record in the ERP and send an email to the vendor saying everything is completed. Okay, so this is how your healthy flow will look like when you don't do it from the testing end. Okay, and maybe I just mentioned something here, right? All of that, that information on the side, and it may appear sometimes like in multiple calls because the output is going from different actions. This is all the context of the conversation. That's why it's important that if you go and return and continue the conversation with the same ID, you don't lose that context. Right. So the history of that process is preserved and used in everything what that agent is doing and making decisions.
Yeah. Because I see the topic there. It says set global variables.
Yeah. So this is kind of experimental from my end because I want to understand how can we inject or enforce the global variables into so we know we can then call them back within the actions. Sometimes it's useful to have something set like that. And this is my recent addition. So it's still work in progress and it's still not at the stage I want it to be, but I want it to be part of the flow. And it's a topic, right? Yeah. So in the topic, I just say, go and set the global variables because I want this record to have to retrieve all of the values like onboarding status and each separate checks for the verification, the reasoning for it, and so on. And I want to set it as the JSON so I can reference it in other actions globally. And again, it's a work in progress for me. I can, if you're interested, I can very quickly show you where I am at. So the input is simply a string of this unique ID of the row for verification table. And this is the input from the side here. So I say verification ID, define in your own dynamic way. And I describe what is this verification ID. Yep. And then what I'll do is...
This is the way to use the topics as the function, like as an action, right? Because you also have input and output variables of the topic, and you don't normally use that when you set it up as sort of like a standard flow, because those inputs are then kind of connected to the trigger intent, and that is normally more than enough to do that. And so just when you turn that flicker that switch on, right? Again, all of these, I would call them you can always also see this as a sub agent, or the flow that you're looking at here as a process of an agent that does some type of action. The input is the one that the orchestrator engine that we define as the system prompt in the beginning. It uses the topic details to understand what it should do, the input to send or pass some discrete variables to it, and then it has the output, which again just feeds back into this flow that then it passes back information to the orchestration engine, right? The output is the feedback from this agent to the orchestration engine that then kind of goes and continues and reasoning. So, and that's the benefit, I think, from some of our competitors, right? They had this technology before, and then they kind of built a totally new one, and they're missing all of this good stuff that we have done R&D for many, many years. And we've just really intelligently, kudos to the product group, right? They've just kind of, repurpose it to do these things. And then it's really easy for us. And that's why we are at 400,000 agents. right? That's the latest number that was shared, as opposed to somebody who's probably at like, just single-digit thousands, right? So
50 are mine.
50,000. Sorry, yes, yeah. No, thank you, Alicia. I mean, it's been a good topic. Hopefully, people got some information out of this. I'll cut it down. We started the recording a bit late, so we had some banter, and that's the benefit of being on the live podcast. We'll make sure that we promote it on our channel. So go subscribe to Alicia on LinkedIn if you haven't already. Her name is Alicia with a J, and then Gilderdale. You'll find her there, and if not, if you're live, you find her in the chat, and I'll be sure to also link it in the description of the video that I shared. So thank you so much, and have a fantastic rest of your day, let's go prep for practice on Baku tomorrow, right? It's Formula One all over, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Fred, and the audience. I really, if you have any questions and you're interested in more of that content, give us a shout, because there's a lot to share that we're still discovering and learning ourselves, and it's a very exciting time to be part of it.
It is. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.